Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Just right off the bat, I'm just gonna say, I knew you had worked on Jurassic Park films, but then after looking more into your profile, I mean, the stuff that you have done is pretty much everything most people grew up with. Aliens, Terminator, Edward Scissorhands, Small Soldiers, Sixth Sense. I mean, incredible, incredible resume. So thank you so much for creating such wonderful, memorable films as your talent,
Oh,
has been able
thank
to
you.
achieve.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Uh, where are you based in LA?
No, I've just recently retired.
Oh,
After
you're
four,
done.
yeah, after 40 years, I thought, I've done it all, and I finished up with 4 seasons of The Mandalorian, or 3 seasons of The Mandalorian, and one of Book of Boba Fett, and I don't know, it felt like a good bookend way to finish, and it was
Yeah.
just time after 40 years, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you get that feeling where you're becoming complacent, and you've done everything, then the best time is to hang the boots.
Yeah, I felt like I was starting to repeat myself a little bit, you know. When directors cite your movies and say, have you ever done an effect like this?" They go, "Yeah, that's the one I did." You know that you've sort of done it all.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you. But before I get into anything else, I would love to know your journey into the industry and into the effects work that you do. Just from the top. Just we have an hour, so what are your
Well,
thoughts
I always wanted to do this since I was 5 years old. I was into monsters and dinosaurs, and I remember going to the New York Natural History Museum and seeing the dinosaur exhibits there, and went to the World's Fair. I just dated myself. Saw that exhibit with the animatronic dinosaurs, where I think you got in the T-Bird or the Mustang. You went back in time, and I don't know. And I was always a fan of the horror movies, and I watched, Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein and Dracula and King Kong and all those things, and they were a big deal to me. And I always wanted to make monsters or creatures. And then we moved from the East Coast, moved down to Louisiana, and people wanted to be helpful, but they really weren't. There was like, well, I think people do that already out in California. And so I don't know how you're going to get into that. So one day I just decided to get into that. So I packed up, moved out to California with, like $1,000, and thought I would get into the industry a lot easier than it actually happened. But worked a bunch of odd jobs, and um, got a job at Gelson's supermarket, and I worked part-time so I would have time to go out and meet people and do things. And I got a meeting with Stan Winston, and my first meeting with him, he sort of looked at my book and flipped through it and handed it back to me, and it was about that quick. And he said, "Oh, reminds me of me when I was starting out. Well, have a look around." So I stayed there for 2 hours, looked at every square inch of that shop and the sculptures there and just molds and everything, and just sort of absorbing it in. And it just really made me want to get into that. So I would bug Stan all the time, and I ended up going over there working for free on a video, a rock video, sticks video to be precise. And I don't know, and I never got hired right away, but about a year later, after I did get a job at Makeup Effects Lab, which was my first movie, the destruction of Metal Storm, the destruction of Jared Sin in 3D. So that was my start. But what was amazing about that is I was getting paid to work in film, and in a very small shop like that, you get to do everything. You sculpt, you paint, you run foam, you work on scenery, you work on props. So it was a great education, and thanks to those guys for hiring me. But and all the connections that you make are important, because a lot of these same people ended up putting in a good word for me with Stan when he was trying to crew up for the Terminator. And he goes, I think I know that guy. And so, anyway, long story short, he ends up calling me to work on the Terminator. So I get hired and go there for about a month, and then the Terminator got put on hold. But luckily, Stan had other work going on. He was working on a TV show called Manimal, so we had to do some reshoots, and then we did some stuff for some other episodes, and then kind of parlayed into some other little small stuff. And so I became one of Stan's guys, and then the Terminator came back. So then that was my first big movie to work on. And that was my film school. It really was, because you got James Cameron wrote, directed this thing for $6 million. And the story was Stan got the job because Dick Smith recommended him, because originally Jim had reached out to Dick Smith to do it. And Dick goes, I don't do that kind of stuff. Stan Winston's really good at robots. He can do it. And he had to tell Jim a few times, and then he took a meeting with him. And then we met Jim, and he came in with all these drawings and paintings, and he really had this thing figured out. And I mean, that's, if you know Jim at all, or if anyone really gets to know him, he can do anybody's job as good or better than you. So he was a great one to learn from, because it was filmmaking 101, and we got to intimately really know him. And Stan was full of great ideas, and so that was a great learning experience, which sort of launched a 25-year career for me with Stan. And never got laid off, never stopped working for him, and had the opportunity to work on all those great movies. And then after his untimely passing, we formed Legacy Effects, and carrying on his legacy.
Phenomenal. I mean, it's just so incredible that, people in the world of film, with my background in film too, and I'll get to that later, is that we always think that, we are going to get some work and it's going to be so easy, but you really have to bust, your
Yeah.
time and your body and everything. And it's always that never giving up attitude that some people get it in 10 years, some people get it in two, whatever that is. And, you kept that. And I think the timing, as they say, timing is everything a lot, but timing is only everything if you really work hard for that time. And you
Yeah.
just entered in
Yeah.
exactly at that right time.
It was the right time. I remember seeing the movie Alien in the movie theater. And
Mhm.
it's like, wow, what am I doing? Because now I was watching this movie. It wasn't a B movie, or, it had amazing performances in it, amazing creature work, the way it was shot. It was like, it really was an eye-opening thing for me. And it started to get the wheels turning that I need to get out to California. And so I got out there in 82 with that movie come out in 79. It took a few years, but that was the impetus to really get me moving and get, you got to do this. And my mother was very supportive. She always said to me, what's the worst thing can happen? If you don't go out there and do it or try to do it, you'll never know whether or not it was a thing, and you'll never be satisfied. You'll always have some job and think in the back of your mind, what if I did that, you know?
That
So,
that that's so true.
yeah, so I thought, I'm single and I don't have a family, I'm not married, nothing. Let's just go do this. Go do this, and there's some trying times when after I worked on Metal Storm, which was supposed to be a 2-week gig, and it ended up being 4.5 months or 4 months. Then after that ended, it's like, uh-oh, now what? Because I didn't have the job at the grocery store anymore. And you start picking up odd jobs, you do whatever you can to sort of extend your time till you get the next thing. And that was some there were some times there when you're starting to question your own sanity. What am I doing?
No, I
But
mean we always have those times. There's nothing wrong with that, but it moves us forward, right? It's just one
it
of those
does
things.
move us forward, and it makes us stronger, and it makes you appreciative and grateful for when you do finally get there. And yeah, I always look back, and I am grateful for those opportunities. And I think you're right in that you have to make your opportunities. Timing might be there. There's doors you can go through, but you got to go through them. You got to do it, or else it's not going to happen. No one's going to hand it to you on a silver platter.
100%. One of the things that your mom said is something that I live by is that it's not just in my film career, anything in life, whether it's relationships, work, whatever it is, every decision that you want to make, you better make it thinking that in 40, 50 years, when life is about to come to an end, I don't want to think back and saying, what if?
No,
Try it. Even if you fail, at least you tried.
right.
Regret is the worst thing. And people, a lot of people I've seen old people in their eyes, like how much regret they have. And it's the worst possible feeling in the world.
I feel that. I don't have any regret, which is a good thing, but I didn't want to have that. And I
Right.
thought, what's the worst thing that happen? Is that fail miserably and come back home and know that, all right, that path wasn't for me. But that's not the case. And
No,
you
it's
do
the
have to
reverse.
stick to it. And what something I realized when I got to Los Angeles was a feeling, growing up, I was blessed with, artistic talents and things. And, you're like that one of the best artists in your high school or whatever. And then I went off to college, and you realize when you're in a room with all the other artists, well, they're all there for the same reason you're there, because they were the best in their high school or whatever. And it sort of makes you want to up your game. You see other people's work. Well, the same thing happened to me when I got to Los Angeles. You realize, wow, the competition is, exponentially. They leaps and bounds ahead of where I was at. And I think that sort of, I don't know if you want to call it an ass kicking or whatever, but it's a wake up call
Sure.
that
Absolutely.
is like, okay, I've got a lot to learn. And at that point in time, I sort of decided the minute you stop learning and stop growing, it's over, because there is so much more to learn and to do, and you have to keep pursuing things and keep getting better at what your craft is. And
True.
for me, anyway, that's how I grow and continue. And something that Stan said, after we worked on Jurassic Park, which is related to what we're about to talk about, was the onset of the digital, and how it made some people feel like dinosaurs and ready to quit. And for Stan, it was like, no, we need to embrace this. It's like, if you look at when the synthesizer came around, or digital music or whatever, did people stop playing the piano or guitar? No, they didn't. So there's a way to incorporate this into our tool set and make it part of what we do. And instead of being anti-digital, it was the mindset was to embrace it and see how it can help us. And I mean, flash forward to the Mandalorian, all the stuff that we're doing with Baby Yoda. Thank goodness for ILM's help removing all the rods and cables and all of that. It just frees you up to create more and to control that puppet uh, more, more hands-on, in a way that you couldn't do before. It reminds me of a funny story. There was a young director I was working with who asked me, so in Aliens, which scenes were digital and which were practical? And it's like, okay, well, none were digital. The only digital that was going on during Aliens, I think, was what was it? Young Sherlock Holmes had just come out, and there was some scene where I don't even remember what it was. The stained glass comes to life or something. I don't quite remember it. It wasn't all that good, but that was what was going on. But back on Aliens, we had to do everything the hard way. And that queen alien, when she comes down out of the dropship, I mean, it was a giant marionette, basically. And Jim had to photograph it, and we're spray painting out the wires, and he's lighting it, so you hide all of that. But you learned how to do it the hard way, so that when you get the digital help, you've got that background of that old school magic trick or a marionette, and you combine it with some digital technology and things that you can't do, and you create something sort of a hybrid between. I think it was Jurassic Park 3 that we really started embracing some of that hybrid technology, where they added on a digital tail onto the Spinosaurus, or so it opens up a new way of thinking
Right.
instead of being defeated by this other technology. Kind of figure out how to make it work.
It's funny you mentioned that, we're at that same stage now again with AI. I mean, with the strike and all that stuff that's going on.
Mhm.
And not just even in that, like I'll give you an example. Um, ChatGPT came out, what, maybe 8 months ago now, probably November, December, I remember. In a matter of 2 months, transcribing jobs literally pretty much disappeared. I mean, now there's so many AI tools that let you do that. They're not 100%. People, big companies will still use transcribing. But how do you adapt AI? Now that's a big question. Like, what you're saying is absolutely right too, because this has been going on from the beginning of mankind, like, especially in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
What if this happens? What if that happens? So we'll see how that goes. But going back to Aliens, I saw it recently. I've been watching a lot of old films because I'm not crazy about what's coming out, in the last 10 years. So I saw Aliens, Alien 3, The Covenant.
Oh, so you saw the whole
I
thing.
saw the whole thing.
Yeah.
What I loved about the first one was it was a very minimalistic approach by Ridley Scott, by showing less of the alien, which
Yeah.
worked, which was really great. Aliens, I didn't find Aliens scary. Aliens, I remember the first time I saw it, I was probably 15, 16. I was petrified by that movie. And had there been any kind of digital effects, I guarantee that it wouldn't have that same effect on me. Because, just seeing the queen alien, and just the teeth, the detail, and everything in that film is just so incredibly done. And the finale scene, when it actually comes down the elevator, I was watching it
Hmm.
recently. I'm like, holy crap. I never thought about it back then when I saw it from the technical standpoint, but now I sadly have to assess everything from the technical standpoint, which is good and bad. But it was phenomenal. I mean, if like you said, if it was anything digital in there, it wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have had the same kind of effect as it did on people.
Yeah, I mean, the first movie is like a haunted house movie. I liken it to, you're trapped on this ship and this thing that you're not really seeing is slowly killing everybody in the most horrible way. And Aliens is like a war movie, and yeah, that scene where that smart gun is in the corridor, as a sentinel, and it goes off after it's shot to pieces. Who knows how many of them, but they're still coming. And then the counter goes down to zero, and then it's done. That I found scarier than even showing the aliens or whatever, because it's the idea of, oh my God, what else is out there? But yeah, they're two different movies, and I think that's why Aliens worked as a sequel. It wasn't trying to copy the
Yeah.
first one. It took the same story and just grew it and went off in its own direction, which was neat. But I'm sure Jim would use digital today if he was making that movie. But at the time, I think it was a really good use of the animatronics and the things that we did, and it was shot really well. And part of that is Stan, because Stan's always wanted to be a director and did a lot of second unit directing, and he understood. And that's something that I always try to do with the directors that I work with, is understand the asset that we're creating for you, its strengths and its weaknesses, and let's play to its strengths, not its weaknesses. Because if you ask it to do something it can't do, it's going to fail. But this is what it does, and this is what it does really well. And that's something that I did when we started to do the Mandalorian series, was put together that little how to, or my version of how to shoot the, I call it Baby Yoda. It's Grogu, but the world affectionately calls it Baby Yoda. But show all its warts and show what it does really well, but also show its negatives. So that way, collectively, we can avoid that and play to its strengths. And I think that was a good lesson to learn. And I think that was an outgrowth of the Stan and Jim Cameron movies that I worked on. And sorry, I got all
No,
these
you're fine.
messages popping in.
No, you're okay. Let's talk about Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park came out in 1993. The Abyss came out in 87, which was, I mean, the first of its kind, with the liquid, Mary Steenburgen, and then T2 came out. I mean, that had some great animatronics, following up with T1. But Jurassic Park, I mean, that revolutionized the film industry, although I would still give a lot of credit to T2 and Abyss for that. But still,
Mhm.
from the combination of animatronics to CGI and Spielberg usage of heavy animatronics in like non-full shots, like, whether it's the feet or half body. And that worked really well, again, just like Aliens, and sort of terrorizing the audience. How did you get on board? Obviously, you came with Stan Winston team, but what was the process of working on that film from the get-go work? And since, because you said you loved dinosaurs.
Well, we were all very excited when we heard about it. We were finishing off Terminator 2 when we heard about it. And we started doing concept work, you know, fleshing things out before it was even really 100% go. I think Stephen contacted Stan, and they started a dialogue. And I think we got that job because of the Queen Alien, which was a fairly big character. it was maybe 12, 14 feet tall. And there was some hydraulics that we used for the head to move it. And it was an interesting technology that we were putting together for the Queen. But I think that gave Steven Spielberg some faith that we could do this with the dinosaurs. And Stan, being who Stan was, he goes, "I have no idea how I'm going to do this, but I will." And we did. And so we, as a team, everyone that was working for Stan at the time, we were all very excited because, yes, for me as a kid growing up, I was a big dinosaur fan, and so this opportunity, and we started to get some pages from Michael Crichton's book. This is how early on it was. There was no script, and his book wasn't even out at that point in time. I don't know what they call those pages where the author is still
Right.
sort of work in progress, but I mean, it was well along. But so we're sort of reading parts of Michael Crichton's book, and Stephen is sort of selecting which dinosaurs are going to be in the movie and what set pieces are going to, how that's going to dovetail into the film. There's going to be a T-Rex, there's going to be a Velociraptor. And interesting story is once that Deinonychus or Velociraptor, which are a lot smaller animals than were depicted in the movie, but after the movie came out, they discovered the bones of one, which was dubbed the Utah raptor, because that's where they found it, which happened to be the same size as the one in the movie. So lesson learned is you really don't know anything about these dinosaurs or whatever. But we were heavily influenced by a guy named Gregory Paul and his book on dinosaurs and his sketches, and Bob Backer's information, who they sort of used as a character almost in, I think it was the second one, Lost World. But Jack Horner was brought on as a consultant, and he's a very famous paleontologist. So all these things were sort of lining up, and the excitement was building, and Crash McCreary was doing sketches of these dinosaurs in the set pieces that we were hearing about from Steven Spielberg. So the concept art was being created. So it was all starting to fall into place, and excitement was building within, our group. And you never feel like you have enough time, but this one was one where we sort of had enough time. Once we started working on it and schedules start happening and things shifted, like the sick triceratops was never supposed to shoot first, but that shot first in Hawaii. So it's like, okay, that's a game changer. And so, you shift. Once you start seeing the schedule, then priorities become real, because up until that point, we were just creating dinosaurs on sort of the hearsay of when they were going to deliver. I'm sort of jumping all over the place here, but
That's perfect. I love it. I love it.
but in the early stages of this, when we first heard about it, it was very exciting. And I think we all probably grew up in the same environment, because everybody that was working on these were big fans of dinosaurs. But the Gregory Paul and that information was important, because what we wanted to do was create dinosaurs that no one had seen before, but were accurate. And, the way they used to be done, and the bones were put together where they were dragging their tail, and the Gregory Paul stuff, you realize, no, that tail is counterbalance, and they're walking the theropods, which is the T-Rex, is part of that group. They're built a certain way. And anyway, so we took a deep dive into anatomy, studying birds, studying other reptiles, trying to figure out what these textures would be. So as artists, that's the way we're looking at it. We're starting to get the story beats as how this stuff uh, is going to play in the movie, and you realize this velociraptor or raptor, as it got shortened to, is a big deal. And there was going to be three components to this movie. There's going to be the animatronics, which we were carrying a lion's share of shots, and then there was going to be Phil Tippett was going to do go motion versions of these dinosaurs. And then there was going to be the visual effects component. What we didn't know is that Dennis Muren and his group were really pushing forward this new CG technology, computer generated image technology. And so they were doing that all along. The maquettes that we were creating were in scale for what Phil Tippett needed for his go motion. And then later it became also what ILM needed. So Stan Winston Studio designed and created all these dinosaurs, obviously with Steven Spielberg's blessing and sign off on what they would be. And all those models were sent to ILM and originally to Tippett's until Phil Tippett. I remember we were watching dailies very early on in the process, and they showed at the end of the dailies, they showed a little test footage of the T-Rex walking. And I had helped to sculpt that T-Rex, and I had painted it. A guy, Bill Basso, and I had done the paint scheme of what this T-Rex was going to look like. And all of a sudden I see, basically looks like our sculpture and our paint job come walking out on the screen, and in a way we'd never seen before, because it was with CGI, and it was truly amazing. And so Dennis Muren was there, and we're gonna incorporate this technology into the movie, and all the producers and Steven and everyone was on board. And at that point, Phil Tippett was like, "Oh, well, I'm a dinosaur now," and everyone was pretty stunned in seeing all of that footage. But they ended up doing, I think, the best thing they could have done, which was incorporating Phil Tippett into their world and helping them with the performance of all these dinosaurs, because Phil really knows that stuff, hands down. And so I think, and they really, with that CG, they really were breaking. Obviously, they broke new ground, but they were really trying to root it in a realism that I think got lost there after Jurassic Park for a while. There was a sense of weight, and there was a sense of gravity, and all those things were very important. And I think it holds up pretty well to this day, because of those ground rules that they really followed. And I think it made for a stunning way to combine all of these different effects. I was in a raptor suit, and I was in raptor legs, and all these different ways to get the shot. And then there was full animatronic puppets. But I remember Phil Tippett coming over and helping coach me on the movement of it all. And it was a really interesting film. Also, I remember one of the days when Steven Spielberg came to our shop and was talking about it all, and how the sound and the smell of these animals. And that's something that really got into my head as an artist, because you think about it, and it's like, they would be loud, and it would be almost deafening to a human being to hear these things roar, and the way this huge creature would move. And so, it just opens up another angle to incorporate into what you're doing. Because beyond the look of it, you also have to create uh, a performance. Because at the end of the day, the best special effects or the best artwork or the best puppet that you make, if it can't perform and help tell that story, it's lost. Your work is for naught. So we all were Screen Actors Guild performers as well, because when we took these things to set, you make them act. They become a character. And that's something that Stan always said, which stuck with me. He goes, we don't do special effects, we create characters.
Nice.
And I think about that, and it's like, when you watched Frankenstein's monster, you were watching a character. He might have a makeup on and he might look like a creature or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's a character. Queen Alien was a character, the Terminator was a character, and the movies are named after them.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
Jurassic Park, I mean, these dinosaurs, they're important, they're characters.
I mean, Jurassic Park, to this day, I can say, based on the stuff that I have seen in the last 30 years, even the most recent Jurassic World films, nothing comes close to the effects that were in that film, from full CGI to animatronics to everything. I mean, there are some really close ones, but it just looks so much better even after 30 years, and it's been 30 years. Can you believe that? Like, it's been 30 years since Jurassic Park came out last.
Wow. Wow.
It's a huge, and I didn't know this. I mean, I thought I was the only crazy nut, because Jurassic Park inspired me to become a filmmaker. But there's a huge community online, and I learned about it after I started the podcast a year ago. There's people in Europe who have these giant, like 2 to 3 feet, textured made T-Rex, like really authentic stuff. Some scenes from the original film, Triceratops scene, the T-Rex attacking the first scene in the when he breaks the fences. I
Hmm.
mean, it's influenced so many people, and you realize it after a long time. I mean, I think, Raiders and ET, Star Wars, people talk about, but I never knew Jurassic Park had that much of an impact on people's lives, not just from a filmmaker standpoint, but just personal lives. It's
Hmm.
amazing what you guys have done. I mean, still living on. We had like the sixth Jurassic Park / World film
I
coming.
know, right? Yeah, it keeps on going. Yeah, I think it's really struck a chord with people, that first movie, because it brought dinosaurs forward. People always loved them growing up, but I think they finally got a glimpse of, hopefully, what made them real or realistic, and really drew people into it.
Yeah.
Credit Mr. Spielberg and his filmmaking skills, and watching him work, it was neat. I just come off of T2 and with James Cameron, and then going into Jurassic Park with Steven Spielberg. I felt, not only I had to kind of pinch myself, because it's like you're working with these
Yeah, of course.
auteurs and these you know cinema geniuses, and here's your opportunity to collaborate with them. And Stephen is very collaborative. If you have an idea, he wants to hear it, and he'll incorporate it if it's valid. Or but he was always very open, and he was great to work with on that film. And personally, for me, uh, working in that raptor suit, and I was eating up to that. I was rehearsing and doing all this, and then you get there on the day, and then it's like, wait a minute, Steven Spielberg is directing me in this shot. You do, there's a few of those pinch yourself moments, but then you just sort of forget and just do what you do, and you don't get caught up in it, or at least I didn't. It's like, well, I got to perform, I got to do this. And anytime a dinosaur, we brought one out, it was important that it succeed. And the T-Rex, that was, what a marvel that was. It's like 18,000 pound animatronic that we really broke a lot of new ground on figuring out how that was going to work. Incorporated a lot of very talented people from the theme park industry into our fold, and Stan's desire to create a character really figured out how to control those big hydraulics. And in some ways, that big giant T-Rex was easier to control than some of the other puppets, because of that telemetry device, where it was a one-on-one. If you grabbed its head and you moved it, the big one would move right in sync with it. And so we learned and grew from that experience quite a bit. But it was pretty remarkable creation that T-Rex was. As big as it was, when it would go by, it would pull about 1 g of force. It felt like a bus driving by. I mean, it was something else. We would have to set up these lights and tape off the area and constantly remind people that this thing is, it's like 18,000 pounds. You can't just run in underneath it or whatever. We all had to be, safety awareness, and there was always talks about it, but it worked really well, except for one time. And it's a
do share.
pretty famous story now, but
Yeah.
originally the T-Rex was not supposed to work in the rain. And so that got changed, and I get why, because it's much more interesting seeing the rain and all of that. So we were there on set, and reason we couldn't get it wet, because the skin was made of foam rubber, because at the time that was and really today, for something that big, the foam rubber is lighter than the silicone would be. There was a whole host of reasons why it was foam rubber. But the problem with foam rubber in the rain is it absorbs water.
Yeah.
And the thing was tuned to a certain weight. And so by the skin absorbing all this water, it created a different weight. And now the tune was off, so it would kind of shake and not cooperate. So that wasn't good. So we were there all night long with towels and heaters and, drying out the skin. But we made it through, and then you figured out how to try to retune it so that it would operate when it was gaining water weight, and it's very complicated, but it worked out, and I think it's for the best in the film when you see it in the rain. But it made for some trying moments. And what we didn't want to do was to, Stephen had all this trouble at times, I guess, with the shark. I wasn't there, so I don't know. But we didn't want our reputation to be, this thing not working. So anyway, we got through it and figured it out. It was quite an achievement, that T-Rex.
No, for sure. And I mean, I always wonder, there was this, I don't know if this is accurate. I read it, I think, in Hollywood Reporter Variety. When the book was about to be published, I don't know if the publishing house dramatically presented the story, that James Cameron was also looking to do Jurassic Park. So Spielberg apparently beat him to it by a few hours.
Mm,
Because, and I wonder, I mean, I love Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park. Like it's like the holy grail. But I wonder what James Cameron would have done. It probably would have been like rated R, kind of like Aliens. But it would have been interesting to see, it's just fascinating how two directors would have done the same film and how would it come about. There should be some sort of a experiment with a film where you have you hire two directors, two group of, collaborators, and let them go at it and see which one makes what kind of movie. Not necessarily better, but what kind of
right.
movie.
Yeah. I remember Jim coming over to our shop when we were doing concept work, and I had this book out. I can't remember the painter or the artist's name, but there was a T-Rex that he had painted really boldly with a red head on it.
Mm.
And I remember Jim looking down and pointing, and he goes, "That's what I would do for the T-Rex." And so I don't know, would have been a different movie for sure. I never heard that story, and I never. I mean, we were pretty close to both camps, but that's the kind of thing that you don't really hear about if it is true, and it could very well be true. But
Yeah.
yeah, it would have been an interesting thing. It's sort of like when they filmed Dracula back in 1931. And during the daytime they did the one version, and then at night they did the Spanish version of it. And they're on the same sets, same sort of costumes, everything. It looks very similar, but they're very different. So that would have been something else.
I gotta check that out because I'm always fascinated, not just at level of Spielberg, James Cameron, even like a student level or intermediary or pro. You just give one story, same script to two different directors, and you see what happens. I mean, that's itself is an interesting case study. Like how do
Yeah,
they involve they input their own like their own personal elements into the film and their own vision. It's fascinating. I mean, I'm always curious about it. But having said that, you worked on The Lost World,
hmm,
which was, which at the time I wasn't crazy about when it came out, although I had a great theatrical experience. But looking back at it, I still think it's the second best Jurassic Park film, hands down. And what was your role significantly working? Like, what were some of the challenges that you had on that one?
I
Given
think
you
uh, they're all very challenging movies, those Jurassic Parks, because of the size and the scope of them. At least the first three were,
Mhm.
because it was still using a lot of big animatronics in
Mhm.
them. And in that movie, you had the two T-Rexes now. So you had these two big
Yeah.
creatures. And what we learned from the first movie, we built the T-Rex from head to toe and tried to shoot the tail and the head in the shot. And it was really hard to get everything into the shot. So in the second one, we, based on the real practical shooting of it, we did sort of from the haunches, or maybe from right behind the rear leg forward of each T-Rex, and we put them on these giant carts, which Michael Lantieri and his group
Mhm.
helped us with. We put down basically train track, uh, and so we could get some motion out of them, because the first one was on a motion base and it would just move in place. This way we would have all of the motion of the T-Rex, plus we could move it forward and back. And so that was technically very challenging to get these big creatures
Mhm.
both on a stage. And it was also really figuring out storyboards and placement, because you couldn't just move the track, because
Right.
it got nailed down into the floor, driven into the floor of the stage. So it was sort of permanent. And so the set would move around the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
If later in the movie it's supposed to be something else, it would still stay on that track, and then it'd come in and do a set dress around it. So it was a lot of logistics, a lot of that fell to me to be there and figure this out with interfacing with the other departments. Michael Lantieri's group, the art department. How they're going to redress the set, and so you're not only on the schedule of when you're going to shoot something, but you're also on a schedule for the redress. And sometimes we had to actually pick the dinosaur up and turn it around and have it going in a different direction, which involved cranes. And quick funny story from the first movie, and then you learn how to do all this stuff, but we had to have a crane come in and pick this dinosaur up and put it on a big giant, I guess lowboy, flatbed, whatever you want to call it, to travel it to the studio, even though it was a Universal film. We were shooting at Warner Brothers. And so this huge dinosaur, we were starting at 3 o'clock in the morning. This crane is lifting and putting this dinosaur, and we're going to take it to Warner Brothers. And it had to leave. I can't remember what our deadline was, 4:30 in the morning or something. It needed to be dark, and it needed to be before there was too much traffic, and it had to go on a certain route because of the size. You can't have all this, it was covered with tarps, but still it would cause quite a stir in morning rush hour traffic in Los Angeles. Anyway, it gets to the studio, and I don't know how it happened, but the guard who was there didn't know this thing was coming. And so I get this phone call at some weird hour, there's a dinosaur out there and I don't have any paperwork for it. And all I could think to tell him was, well, if you want, I can call the producer, Kathy Kennedy or Steven Spielberg, and tell them, or we can just make sure the dinosaur gets to where it's going. And I think he thought about it for a minute, and he thought probably, well, number one, this is huge dinosaur. It's probably supposed to be here. Number two, I don't want to wake these very important people up. So anyway, that's
that's funny. For sure.
We used to have to, these big giant cranes lift these things up and move them around, and they'd have to come in and move them in the set. And a lot of, I remember from that movie was a lot of logistics.
Yeah.
And
what?
No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Go, please. I was just going to say, well, because you had more dinosaurs too, right?
We had more dinosaurs, and it's bigger. It's got more. Plus, we went up to Eureka, and we shot in the forest there, because the old forests that have that primordial kind of look. And so those were logistics of getting certain dinosaurs up to Eureka. And we had little compies, which were tiny little dinosaurs, to giant T-Rexes, to Triceratops, to Gallimimus. We had all these Pachycephalosaurus, and of course you have raptors, and they're shooting all over the place. You're in Eureka, you're on sound stages, you're out in fields, and a little bit north of Santa Clarita, and logistics is what I remember the most about Lost World, is making all these things happen. And
the two scenes that stuck out for me to this day, from an animatronic standpoint, I mean, there was a full scene that was mixed with animatronics and CG, was the raptor scene at the end when he's trying to break the glass car, when Jeff Goldblum is in there, Ian, and the trailer scene. Which I don't know. Have you seen Mission Impossible, the most recent one?
No, I have not.
Okay. Let's just say there was a scene in there that I'm pretty sure was inspired by that.
By Jurassic Park, with the glass and the breaking.
Well, not necessarily the glass, but there were some elements of it. But that glass scene, I mean, that was just one of the most craziest scenes ever.
It was.
It was just like no matter how many times I watched that, I know what's gonna happen, but it's just done so well by Spielberg. The little elements of music kicking in and the glass
Yeah,
cracking and
yeah. No,
phenomenal.
it's true. And for me, because I was actually puppeteering the head of the T-Rex that grabs the guy and pulls him and
Yeah, yeah.
throws him around, and it switches to CG at one point. But we actually I had to grab a stuntman, and I didn't sleep much that night before because it's hard to explain this, but when you're watching, I would watch it in a monitor, and we'd have to set stops on it so that it would reach in at a certain angle, grab him the same way every time. And then once it came up out of the car, then I was free to move it around. But it was, if I missed and didn't get it right, I could push the stuntman into the Jeep that he was in. So it was very stressful puppeteering because you had all the safety concerns, and we rehearsed it many times, and I had it down, but still the lead up to that, it's all you, and you've got to make sure that you do it exactly right. And you kind of, you don't forget a second of it. I can relive it now like it was yesterday.
Mm.
But it was very effective because you can actually see this dinosaur grabbing a guy and lifting him up and starting to move him, which I think is pretty effective.
For sure. It's funny you mentioned that the stuntman. I mean, now you look at Tom Cruise behind the scenes stuntman work. The amount of effort that goes into. I wish, Tom Cruise is a star. He's a producer, so I get it. Like, people want to see that. But I've talked about this to other people on other podcasts that stuntmen in general, people that have no clue who they are, like they're just average people, they're not actors. I wish there was a category for them in the Oscars because they put their lives at risk
Yeah,
more than anybody else. Not to take away from anybody else, but just the fact that they literally put their lives at risk.
yeah.
Um, it's phenomenal the type of work they do, and then obviously the pressure on other people like yourself. There is that liability and legal and all that, but there's also that personal conscience thing. What if I
It
screw
is. It
up?
becomes personal. You don't even think of that. You just get
Yeah,
to know that person, and you want to make sure this goes off without a hitch, you know? And you're both doing it for the same reason, to create something on screen that's never been seen before and feels dangerous and real. And maybe that's something that seems to be missing from these films that I grew up learning and being part of during the 80s, 90s, was there was a real sense of realism that was always there. And I think James Cameron said this one time: you can only suspend belief for just mere seconds before you lose an audience.
hmm
And I think there's too much of that that goes on in films now, where they it's just too unbelievable. You just don't buy it after a while. It's like,
no, no.
instead of it just being a second or two of that unbelievability, like, oh, I guess that could happen, you're just bombarded with this fake reality,
Yeah,
that video game world that you're sort of, I don't know, just doesn't make it
no.
real.
It's true. I mean, at the end of the day, it's story, right? One of the films that you worked on, Sixth Sense. So, my kids are now 13 and 11, so I am rewatching all the stuff that I've grown up with.
Yeah, yeah,
They go to cinemas, watch the stuff that comes out now, and they're watching old stuff. So we saw Sixth Sense together, and you know what happens at the end, right? And
sure,
obviously,
sure.
it's I'm just sitting there. I'm also looking for clues because I haven't seen that in a long time.
Hmm.
And when the movie ends, they were just completely blown away, right? And that to me is an achievement in storytelling more than visual effects. I mean, there was effects in there, but they were not heavy effects. You know,
Right.
And that's what people are attracted to, no matter what age you're in. If you tell a great story and you put that as a priority over effects, which I think has happened a lot now, whether it's a studio's fault or the directors or the budget or whatever it is, it's just that effects have taken precedent over story. And that's
I agree. I mean, that's how I was brought up, was that story is number one. Because if you've got a great story and yeah, performances are okay and the effects are okay, but a great story, it's going to, I mean, go back to all the movies that we would watch in the 40s and 50s. Not the greatest effects in these things, but the story was
no, the
amazing.
story.
And
Yeah.
they had us, they really had us going there. But I wish I could turn off that. I don't know how to do that.
No, I know, and I mean there are a handful of directors like Christopher Nolan says that he hasn't didn't use CGI in the new Oppenheimer, which I'm looking forward to see. You know, you look at Quentin Tarantino, you look at
Mhm.
Martin Scorsese, Spielberg, and
True.
Spielberg is
Yeah.
probably one of the few directors who uses the combination of practical versus visual effects very well. Like it's very tastefully done. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, no, I wish we're at that time now where things are gonna flip back to the old way. And I'm so thankful to Tom Cruise that he's trying to keep that practical effects alive. And you know,
Mhm.
it's not many people who are doing that.
No, it becomes easier to just. I worked on a film years ago, and the director had no idea how he's going to shoot something, and we're there. We're supposed to shoot it, and yeah, let's just do a plate. There's too much of that where it's just let's do a plate. I don't want to think about it now. I'll think about it, 4 months from now.
Yeah,
And
that attitude of we'll fix it in post is a
we'll
killer.
fix it in post. Yeah, it's like that's expensive. And the thing is, if you just figure it out ahead of time and know what you're doing, even if it is going to be done in post, at least know what you're doing. That way you can direct everybody in the plate shot. But sometimes they just shoot an empty plate and then they'll put everything in later, just because they don't want to think about it. And in their defense, that might be because they don't have the budget, they don't have the time. Who knows? Who knows? But it's a very different world that I just left in filmmaking, and I enjoyed the Mandalorian series with John Favreau and Dave Filoni and that group, because it felt more old school, like they were
Mhm.
trying to story first, and they followed all the rules that I was trained and grew up with. And I think there's some creative stuff going on there. But
Yeah.
some of these films, it just feels like it's all about the money. It's all about the studio.
Yeah. It is, and it sucks. It really does. But and I think, to kind of wrap it up with this thing, I feel that when you have access, and I remember this too, because when I came into film, I came in the 2000s. So it was like that time when film was transitioning into digital. So
Hmm.
I remember editing on 8 millimeter and 16 millimeter on flatbed editing, like,
Oh,
chopping
right,
and cutting and
right.
splicing it. And obviously then I transitioned into digital, but I feel, and I remember this even now, like, when I'm working on digital, because my budgets are not the way, Hollywood studio budgets are. When you are limited with resources, you are forced to come up with solutions.
You are.
When you have everything at your fingertips, then your mind just becomes lazy. Not intentionally. It's just human
Right.
nature. You just kind of relax and like, oh, we'll figure it out.
Terminator 1, $6 million.
Yeah.
Aliens, $19 million. You figure out how you're going to do all this stuff. And I think that's, you really think about your shots and how you're going to create. And and if you got a great story, That's most of the battle right there.
Yeah, yeah. Everything else falls into place. If you have a great
Does.
story and if your collaborators and if you don't have an ego on the set as a director, like you're collaborating with everybody and
Hmm.
that works out fine.
Yeah, and because every movie, every TV show, every commercial, everything that we've ever worked on, you always want to bring your A game. I mean, that's how I was trained. That's how I was brought up. Is you put 110% in it because it's a reflection of you. And when people see that work, I mean, I can't, you know, take credit for the whole film, but my portion of it is definitely on me. So
Mhm.
you want to deliver, you want to make sure that's the best it can be.
Yeah, 100%. And it's phenomenal that again, like I said in the beginning, your resume, you must be really proud of yourself, which you should be if you don't think you are, because it has changed the game of the film industry for the
Ah,
longest time. And people like Stan Winston, yourself, Phil Tippett, Dennis Muren, like all these people. I mean, it's just amazing that story has taken always the first priority with all you folks. And I, love everything that you have done. And one title I forgot is Predator. I still remember watching
mm.
at the age of 9, which I was not supposed to watch at the age of 9.
Yeah, that one
But
that one sort of came about in an interesting way. It wasn't I mean, there was a whole nother creature, there was a whole nother thing, and then in the
yeah,
11th hour, they came to Stan and said, "Can you help us?" Because I think they were about to cut it into it was Arnold versus the Sandinistas in the jungle because nothing was working.
yeah,
And then we made the Predator in pretty short order, and it
yeah.
became a classic film. It really did. It was something else that I'll never forget. You just knew you had to deliver because when he takes that mask off, it better be cooler than the mask, or else you're in trouble.
Yeah, yeah. No, I remember watching it the first time and that mask came off and it was perfect. It was like nothing you have ever imagined. Being
No, it was
completely
really
different.
really groundbreaking. A lot of talented people. I mean, I remember James Cameron actually had some idea about those pinchers, and he was talking to Stan on a plane. They were going to Japan. I think it was for promotion for Aliens, if I remember right,
Yeah.
and some really talented artists working, new guys that were brought in, Steve Wang and Matt Rose, that were super talented, and I don't know, that was one of those magic things that just kind of all came together and really worked. Predator.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure, John, talking to you. I would love to chat with you more, but maybe we can do more stuff down the road if you have time. I would love to talk
Absolutely.
about films like Small Soldiers, T2. I mean, there's just so much. Really looking forward to more conversations, hopefully.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much
the
for joining.
opportunity. All right.
No, no, thank you for
Yeah.
giving your time. I totally loved it. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. And do come back for another episode. Until then, have a great day.